The old-fashioned way, of course, would be a dog. Even if it is a small one, they're going to let you know if someone's out there, and it may be a deterrent that may make a difference.
Mine is small, but he's loud.
Okay, fair enough, but they'll let you know someone's there that's not supposed to be.
That's for sure.
Welcome to the Opposites Unite podcast,
Where we discuss real estate and lifestyle topics,
break barriers,
build connections,
and find common ground.
Let's unite. Okay, so today we are here with our friend and client, Roy Guthrie.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Great to be here.
Good. I'm glad. We're happy to have you. Roy, can you tell us, start by telling us a story of how we met? Do you remember?
Sure, of course I do. I think it was about 7 to 8 years ago. And I was in the market looking for a condominium. And I went into the Arbor Park complex, and I had lived there previously in the early 1990s. And I went to the unit. It was a 2-bedroom with a loft unit, and that's where I met you and your associate initially.
You have a good memory.
Sometimes.
Selective?
Yes.
That's the same with most guys.
That's true.
Well, that's great. And it's amazing that we've been able to stay in touch over the years, and we've done several transactions together since. Can you tell everyone how those transactions went and what your experience was like?
Sure. When I first met you, I just felt comfortable with you. You weren't pushy. You were knowledgeable, and I knew right away that I wanted to use you as a potential real estate agent to purchase a property. At the time, I was in the market for a 1-bedroom in one of the complexes, either Arbor Park or Royal West, and I wound up buying in Sienna Villas with your assistance. And it was a very smooth process. Your professionalism was what really caught my attention, and most importantly, you explained every step of the way. I had some basic knowledge on real estate, but you can always learn more. And you were not pushy. That's what the factor that also really stood out in my mind.
How had your real estate experiences been before working with us?
In the early 90s, horrendous.
Say more.
I will leave their names out, but it
Please
was
do.
Wild West times in Santa Clarita where the interest rates were in double digits. They were doing a concept of calling a lease option to buy with homes where a potential buyer would rent and pay the mortgage of the owner, and an escrow company was supposed to hold the funds that you had paid in rent on a monthly basis for a possible down payment. And there were a group of agents involved along with lenders, and it fell apart, of course, because it was basically borderline illegal, and the people who were potential buyers were not actually approved for a loan. Initially, they were duped to believing that their down payment would be sufficient enough to be a down payment, giving the impression that they had been approved already.
Sounds like a scam.
It was, absolutely. And I got caught up, not with a lease option to buy, but another agent who wasn't particularly honest. And I was only 21 at the time, coming from New York City. I'd never purchased a property, so I was in way over my head. And I had the typical eagerness of a first-time buyer and probably not seeing some warning signs that I could have seen if I'd been more objective.
And at that time, were you in law enforcement when you were 21?
Yes, I was.
You were already in law enforcement.
Correct.
So what nobody knows yet is that you are retired LAPD.
Yes.
And now you do private security.
That's correct. I'd served with LAPD for 33 years and retired as a Sergeant 1.
Are you happy to be retired?
I am. It was a good ride, but I made it out of there. There were some bumps and bruises, but it was definitely a part of my life that was very fulfilling, but I'm glad it's over also. And I was fortunate enough to retire at 55 years of age.
I remember a few surgeries.
Yes, at least
just a
half
few.
a dozen. So like I said, bumps and bruises, but I made it.
Excellent. Well, we're happy to have you here. Glad you're retired and living your best life with your granddaughter.
Yes, that is my main focus in my life right now.
Golfing plenty.
Golfing with having her learn golf, and she's also on a competitive swim team.
She's a beast.
She is. She's developed very nicely, and her workouts or training sessions are Monday through Fridays from 7:30 in the morning to 10 in the morning.
She's lucky to have you. That's for sure.
I'm lucky to have her.
Yeah, I would agree.
It's a complementary relationship, without
That's
a doubt.
a great way to look at it.
Yes.
Can you tell me how what your journey was like and how you got started in law enforcement?
I knew I always wanted to be a police officer. And I had come out to Los Angeles as a child because my grandmother lived over in the Westchester area by LAX. And as a child, I'd see LAPD officers, and they just looked extremely sharp in their uniforms. They were fit, and they just really seemed militaristic in a sense of the way they operated. They were very professional. And as I grew older, that desire kept growing in me. And I came out in 1988 after LAPD had gone to my college in New York City about 6 months prior and were recruiting out of state. And I did all my testing in 1 week. And they hired me, and I was in the class several months later. I was the class of 988.
And you had a long, thriving career.
I did. A lot of good and a lot of bad.
Yeah.
I started out in Rampart Division, and that was the height of when crack cocaine was hitting the streets of Los Angeles and the violence that was surrounded the Pico Union, Westlake district area. And it was eye-opening. And you also had a lot of the Nicaraguans and El Salvadorian people coming over and fleeing from their country, and hence the violence that went along with it.
I'm sure that was scary at times.
It was exhilarating. It was an adrenaline rush.
That's the difference between my perspective and your perspective, right?
We did the best we could, but it was nonstop all night. The minute you started your shift, the priority calls, the shootings, the stabbings, it went all night. And we were only on 8-hour shifts at that time period with LAPD, but we were working 12, 15 hours a day.
Long days.
And then going to court in the morning and coming back and doing it all over again. We were not on a compressed work schedule, but I was young, and it was exhilarating, and it was quite the adrenaline rush. But we did what we could, and a lot of good people were victimized in those areas.
Well, it sounds like they were very lucky to have you on their side advocating for them.
We tried. We
Yeah.
tried to do our best, the officers that were out there working hard and being honest.
Yeah.
Yes.
Since you come from a security and law enforcement background, I was hoping that you could help some of our homeowners today with some helpful tips on how to secure their homes and stay safe.
Sure. One of the problems that I encounter or will see is that because Santa Clarita is a safe, quote, neighborhood overall, and it still is, there's a feeling of this crime or the burglaries that are rampant in Los Angeles can't touch me or won't touch me because I, quote, live in a safe neighborhood. So I always try to get that point across to people that security is also a mindset. It's not a state of paranoia, but realizing that you can be a victim of a crime anywhere, whether it's a good neighborhood or not such a good neighborhood. And this is a rich target environment for burglary suspects because people have money up here. I believe I read an article recently in which the median income of this valley is $80,000, and that is extraordinarily high compared to many parts of America. And subsequently, people drop their guards. One of the things I suggest is actually hardening the security on your house. It's good to have alarm systems and cameras, but if you look at the videos that you see on the news or on YouTube, they're being filmed all the time, but the suspects are not deterred by that. What I mean by hardening it is if you own a home, perhaps clearing out some brushes in the front that obscure people that are passing by and where suspects can hide, investing in better locks and windows, particularly sliders since they're very popular out here. I recently installed new sliders in my condominium, and even though it's on the second floor, they're much more secure than the typical sliders that were put in many homes in the late 80s and early 1990s in Santa Clarita.
Sometimes when I show homes, people they'll put a dowel or
Yes.
something in the slider so that if somebody were to open it, then it's gonna bump into it.
That's correct.
I've also seen some kind of locks that like drill down into the ground.
Yes.
And those seem like great ideas. 'Cause
They are, and there's nothing wrong with any of those options. But again, a lot of it is also getting to know your neighborhood in terms of who your neighbors are, what their cars are, because perhaps your house could be being watched by suspects. Some suspects are more sophisticated than others. They actually do some reconnaissance prior to breaking into your home, or some are very random and capricious. But knowing your neighbors, communicating with them, And being familiar with their vehicles is also very important. And I also am a fan of motion detector lights for homes. And all the other things like ringtone or ring bell, the cameras, if you're going to do that, you should probably put them on the inside of the home also. But again, they're not really going to deter suspects that are determined to break in your house. If you have high-end valuables, you probably want to keep them in spots that are not easy accessible because they don't have a lot of time on their hands. They want to get in and get out as quickly as possible.
One of our neighbors' homes was broken into in the last few months, and the burglars came in and they took his entire safe.
Yes, they will do that if it's not bolted down. And even if it is bolted down, they might try it, but it's going to make a lot of noise. And again, the thieves are the burglary suspects are under the penal code called 459 PC. They're very brazen, and they also know that there's not, unfortunately, much prosecution of these crimes. Whereas before, 10 plus 15 years ago, people actually went to prison for burglary.
And they're getting more bold too lately, I've noticed, because a friend of mine's house was burglarized while they were home. And
yes.
at like right in the afternoon.
Yes, indeed it is. And usually, many times burglaries do occur during the daytime because they're thinking or estimating that the owners are not home, but sometimes they are. And when that occurs, that's a different ballgame because that's now referred to as hot prowl burglary, meaning that there are people inside. That's why if a suspect breaks in your home at night, the chances of somebody being home is much higher, and that's a much more serious matter. But these things that people do are all good and well, but I'm a firm believer in actually getting better locks, thicker doors perhaps, and taking a look at your windows. But ultimately, if someone is determined to break into your home, they're probably going to do it at some point. And be careful what you put on Facebook and social media. Oh, we're going out of town for 2 weeks, or we're doing this, we're doing that. That's also not a good idea to do. And be in communications with your neighbors. Make it more difficult for them to break into your house. And maybe if they see something that they don't like in terms of their perspective, they're going to move on to the next house.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. As a best safety practice, whenever we do go out of town, I'll always let our next door neighbor know, like, hey, we're going to be gone for the next 7 days or whatever, 10 days. Keep an eye on the house, and
Exactly.
that
Open
way
communication with your neighbors is
Exactly.
very important.
Yeah, if she sees anything weird going on at the house, she knows what to do.
Right, and also knowing, the Sheriff's Department, they publish information that's open to the public of where the recent crime trends are. And that's also helpful information. But I think also just awareness of your neighborhood and awareness of who your neighbors are and what cars belong on your block and which ones don't.
Makes sense.
Yes.
Makes sense. Anything else?
No, and no. The old-fashioned way, of course, would be a dog. Even if it is a small one, they're going to let you know if someone's out there. And it may be a deterrent that may make a difference.
Mine is small, but he's loud.
Okay, fair enough, but they'll let you know someone's there that's not supposed
That's
to
for
be.
sure. That's for sure.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So I know right now you're working private security.
Yes, I am.
What's a recent win that you had at your job?
The client that I have is a very high-end client, if you would, and there hasn't been any incidents, but we don't also know that our security efforts have not deterred incidents. We recently had a vehicle driving up and down on the street in which the house is located. It appeared that the driver was casing the house or possibly timing when the front gates were opening and closing and seeing how long it would take
Oh, that's interesting.
for the gates to be open. Because we have surveillance cameras, we were able to get a license plate and a fairly decent description of the suspect. And it turned out that he was actually involved in other burglaries in the area in which I currently work. So that was a good deal because he was ultimately arrested for other crimes.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
So your efforts there on the property potentially deterred him.
It's hard to say, it's hard to prove it, but I believe they did. Absolutely. Absolutely, because where I work, there are many other people that are working private security, and we share information with each other. And we try to liaison with LAPD as much as possible.
What's your, on another note, what's your approach when it comes to working with clients?
Presenting a professional image, explaining everything that you potentially are looking at and what your expectations are of the client, meaning an open dialogue of communication. Some of the things that we'll do or ask them, they're regular people and these things don't occur to them, that a minor significant incident or something of that nature could be important. And just try to, the most important thing is present a professional image on how you dress, how you carry yourself. Physical fitness is also reassuring for these people. And then, of course, you have to produce. But the initial, because we are visual after all.
Makes sense.
And you have to present a good image.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you do this every day and they don't. So you're used to looking for different things
Yes.
that they don't see. I mean, it's kind of similar like in my business, I do this every day, you don't. So when we go out and go to find you a property or go to sell one of your properties, they're just things that I know to look for, and that's what you hire me for.
Correct.
Right. Makes sense. So what do you like to do in your spare time? I know a couple of the things.
Yes. I'm trying to learn golf.
Me too.
I'm getting better. I scored a 90 the other day, which was a milestone from 100. But it's the most difficult game that I've ever tried to learn, because it's just you and the golf course and your brain getting frustrated and getting angry about why is this so difficult when it looks so easy.
You take your aggressions out on the golf course.
No, I got over that immature aspect of it because I would get mad and I would come home very angry. I like smoking cigars, and that's probably a result of golf. The drinking part hasn't kicked in yet, but the cigars definitely. I'm also into grappling and jiu-jitsu and boxing, and spending as much time as I can with my granddaughter and taking her out on the golf course or driving range as well.
Yeah, I think she could teach us a few things.
Yes, you've seen some of the videos.
I have.
Because women in general, they're more flexible with their golf swing, and they're not trying to hit the ball out of the park like the typical male is that's first starting. And you have to get past that, because it's not strength or muscle that gets that ball on a good flight and trajectory and accurate. So you have to be very relaxed when you do it. And especially when the girls are about my granddaughter's age, they're they listen, they're intent on it, and they just are able to do it physically.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's nice to have a good work-life balance. And
Absolutely.
It sounds like you definitely do.
Yes.
But I'm curious, what would your ideal client look like?
I don't have a model of an ideal client, because we're dealing with human beings and they're all different. So I just take them as they come. And if I have to adjust my methods or operations or how I do things to the client, and I let them know that, so we can have and keep an open dialogue as we progress and we get to know each other, because it is a service-oriented business. And if you're not getting along with your client, regardless of how good you are, they probably won't get you back, ask you back. And also getting to know their nuances and how they carry themselves throughout the day, the little things that they like and don't like. So I would say there's not really an ideal client. I like the clients that are more easygoing in terms of listening to what I'm saying and asking questions. I have no problem with that. I encourage them asking questions.
Because at the end of the day, you're just there to keep them safe and
Yes.
do what they've hired you to do. So it would only make sense that they listen to you.
Correct.
To your
but-
professional advice.
Yes, but sometimes common sense or sense is not so
Common.
prominent with human beings.
I have the same issue some days,
I know.
I know.
But it's okay. You just adjust to them because they are the customer. And ultimately, I want to provide a good service, just as you do.
Most definitely. Yeah, it's frustrating sometimes though, right? Because if you're trying to do a good job for them and you're giving them your professional opinion and they don't always take your advice, and you can foresee the future and how this is going to play out because you've done it for so long, and same with me. I've done many transactions, and I know where the bumps usually are in the process, and I can see how it's, I can see the trajectory of the transaction. And
Sure.
when a client's not willing to listen to the advice I'm giving, sometimes I can't help the inevitable.
Right. It can be aggravating, but ultimately you just do the best you can.
Exactly.
And sometimes the client has to learn on their own and perhaps quote the hard way.
It's unfortunate, but
It is, but
true.
it happens.
Yeah. Can you tell me about some recent challenges you faced on your job?
Recent challenges. The house that I currently work at is well known in real estate circles. And sometimes we'll have, quote, looky-loos, not on the property, but driving up and down on the street and monitoring the vehicles. And we're also doing a handful of other things at once. It's not just looking at cameras. So that is challenging sometimes, and trying to write down information as to what time you saw this car or the persons, even though it's recorded on the cameras. I also still like to make notes on that, and just monitoring the traffic on the street that's going up and down, and paying attention to cars that have passed perhaps more than once or twice within a certain time period. That's always challenging, because sometimes it's completely innocuous, but you just don't know.
So you have to know the little nuances to look for.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Or sometimes the cars will just stop and park and just sit. And that always draws attention to me, because what are they doing? Are they monitoring the gate, as I mentioned previously, as to how long it takes to open and close, who's coming and going? Are they trying to get vehicles that are coming out of the home and what these people look like and follow them? Because sometimes burglaries don't necessarily start at the residence. It could be at a mall when the person's shopping, and depending upon what stores they go to, they're being followed there. And sometimes crooks will have spotters throughout the high-end malls, and they'll just decide to pick out a random target. They'll look at your jewelry, what kind of watch you're wearing. That's why Rolex watches are a bit dangerous to wear in public these days, because once you know what a Rolex looks like, you can spot it a mile away and follow them to the house. Sometimes they'll commit robberies, but other times they just want to do a burglary because it's a property crime, and if they are caught and arrested, it's much less time in jail or prison, even if it goes that far.
And what can homeowners do, though, if they're in that situation?
They should always know where their local, if they're in Los Angeles, where their closest police station is. Check your rearview mirror occasionally. When you come to a red light and you're waiting, don't park parallel to other vehicles. Leave room with cars that are in front of you and behind you in case somebody comes out of a vehicle, or they're trying to box you in. You may have some space to maneuver out of there. If you can, always drive in the number 1 lane, so you're not trapped in the number. If you're in the number 2 lane, you could have a suspect on the number 1 lane and the number 3 or behind you, forming a bit of a diamond configuration around you, and you're not going to get out of that most likely.
Okay.
And change your routes of where you're going, and especially if you're going to high-end stores. Change your routes from time to time, and just pay attention in the rearview mirror. Most people, they're either on their cell phones or when they're driving, they're barely looking past the front of the hood of the vehicle. When they come to a light, they're not looking to the left, to the right, and a lot of these things that you could see, if you know what to look for, you can spot them. But just people are tunnel vision all the time, no matter where they go.
And obviously, if you do suspect somebody's following you, don't go home.
Correct. And what I've done with some of the other gentlemen that I work with is we've devised a plan of how to guide clients in from where they are to a local law enforcement agency, and so they can stay safe, and try to get a description of the vehicle, even if it is behind you, or at least get the last 3 of the license plate and what kind of vehicle it is. But that can be challenging for people sometimes, because you'll see a person will see 2 people will see the same car, and it'll be a different color and different doors. But we try to do things like that.
And would just getting the last 3 of the license plate be helpful enough?
Yes, it can be. It helps narrow it down. And it's just too difficult to remember a group of letters and numbers. And the license plates in California are the most combination of letters and numbers in the entire state.
Yeah, I can't say that I would be able to recall it, but maybe the last three.
Right, exactly.
That makes a lot of
I think
sense.
it has to do with just the way the brain works, and most people look from left to right from reading or filling out applications.
Well, and also too, you're trying to read that in your rearview mirror potentially. So
Yes, that's correct.
that's a whole nother that's a whole nother challenge.
Yes.
That's really good info. Thank you so much for that. I'll try to keep that in mind when I'm driving.
And just a lot of people, they're just not paying attention, whether they're walking in the mall, they're on their phones, they're just in a different time zone and they're not looking. And Charles Manson could be standing right in front of them and they won't see him.
Oh, jeez. I've often been driving through a parking lot, as I'm sure you have, and seen the person walking in front of my car just looking down at their phone
Right.
and not paying attention to their surroundings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's amazing they don't get run over.
It really is some days. I wanted to ask you one final question.
Sure.
I know you've been a real estate investor in the past.
Yes,
You sold your investment property.
correct.
What are your thoughts on investing in real estate?
Well, that was the first unit I bought through you. And it was, I owned the unit for about 5 years. And because of where, as they say in real estate, location, I made a large profit off of it. Investing in real estate and then renting your properties out, obviously it has a lot of pros, but also has some cons. And the pros are someone else is paying your mortgage, you're getting the tax write-off, and maybe you have some good renters in there that you just like them and you want to help them out. But then, of course, there are other cons, and the laws should be known to an investor, at least the basic laws pertaining to landlords and tenants, because if it goes bad, it can be very difficult. Fortunately, I did not have that situation, so it was a good experience for me. And real estate in a good location is always a good investment. Even if it goes bad, eventually you can always sell your place and most likely make a profit off of it, particularly in Santa Clarita, where even when we were looking at 2008, when the market was drastically going down, it didn't really make much of a difference in Valencia. So I still recommend it, and I think it's a good thing to get into.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. There's no better way to create wealth than real estate.
Correct. That's the oldest way and one of the most surest ways to gain wealth or have some extra money in your pocket.
Agreed. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure having you, and it was great to hear all of your security tips.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning into the Opposites Unite podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to leave a comment for a chance to get a shout out in our next video. See you next time.